Welcome to Labs Weekly, version number 2. Today we have a couple of fun things to talk about for everyone. A couple of different issues that were found in some real-world applications that we thought were interesting. One of them is actually both of them are for open source products, but we thought they were interesting enough that we could talk about. The first one I think we'll talk about is Zulip, which is kind of a Slack competitor. It's an open source version. I think they were acquired by Dropbox within the last year or two. And the open source provider, and it was funny, Matt Austin, he reached out to me one day on Slack and he says, hey, check this out. And in the security notes for Zulip, they specifically said that security practices matter and that Slack is the most popular SaaS team chat provider, but they needed to award hundreds of bounties, bug bounties to security researchers outside the company. And they kind of like threw shade at that. We took a little bit of offense to it because we think bug bounty programs are a good idea. We think the people who do it for the right reasons and not because they have bad security practices, if you will. So we thought it'd be good just to look into Zulip and see how things were. And Matt's probably one of the world's experts in exploiting modern desktop applications, which Zulip is. So I thought we'd have him chat a little bit about that and some of the issues that he did uncover and disclose to them, which they fixed pretty quickly. So Matt, you want to take over and say hi?
Sure. So I thought it was kind of interesting the way they approached the bug bounty conversation, for sure, because, like David said, we encourage. I mean, it's great that a company is listening to, that handles bugs that the customers are sending them, or that anyone can send them, that they were paying out for them, that they were being public and have public disclosure for the vulnerabilities, and even like full details of the vulnerabilities are available to the web. It's basically ripping apart a company for doing the right thing, which is not the way you want to handle things. So it kind of made me a little bit upset. Reading that made me wonder what kind of bounty program they had and how much they were paying, and what they were sort of, what they expected customers to do if not have public bounty programs that people would pay into. So when I first reached out to Zulip or looked at their chat app, I did see that they did have a HackerOne program. It ended up being that the HackerOne program is private. They have a private bug bounty program and it's points only. So when they try to compare themselves to Slack and say that we haven't paid out hundreds of dollars in bounties, what they're really saying is we don't have a paying bounty program, so people aren't participating in our bounty program. And when I actually first looked at the Zulip's bounty program, I got the invite, but I wasn't able to submit issues. And apparently, they had gotten behind on the issues that they have had, so far behind that HackerOne temporarily suspended their account so that they couldn't receive any more new security issues. So they're ripping Slack for being proactive and paying for bounties, but they were unable at the time to keep their bug bounty program running. That's completely free. They just didn't take the time to handle security issues in a way that didn't get their account closed. So I thought that was an interesting approach. We ended up tweeting to them about that sort of comment and had a little bit of a back and forth with the main Zulip Twitter account. And they pretty much doubled down on the answer. They just said, that's right. Who wants to run an app with security issues? And I kind of took that as a challenge accepted. Let's look at your app. And I pretty much destroyed it. I think if you went through so the app is a Slack alternative. It's a chat app. It has video conferencing and some basic chat. It is built on top of Electron. And Electron gets a bunch of flack for as an insecure platform. And some of the flack is deserved, but at the end of the day, you can build a secure Slack app. The problem with Slack, or you can build a secure Electron app, but the problem with Electron and Electron getting all the flack it gets isn't undeserved, because the problem is, even though you can build a secure Slack app, it's not the default. There are 3, 4, 5 different properties, things you need to set up when you build a Slack app to make it secure. And if you just build it out of the box without taking these extra steps, then it's relatively easy with any XSS or any content injection to get to a full remote code execution. And so Electron has a full guide, this Electron guide that has pretty much, the don't do this, validate links before you click them, set up these properties like node integrations disabled and context isolation on. They kind of enumerate everything you need to do. And in reviewing the Zulip app, it was like, you could just walk down the list and find an example of them doing that incorrectly. They go on to talk about how they follow best practices in their security blog. They follow best practices, and that's why they don't have hundreds of security bounties like Slack, is because they follow these best practices. But the best practice for Electron is pretty much the same bug list I sent them of all the things that they didn't do correctly. So at the end of the day, we ended up with, let me get this right, I think there were 3 different remote code execution, or 3 remote code execution vulnerabilities, and then in the desktop app itself. And then there was 1 vulnerability where you can force remote content into the window, and I can send you a link, and it's a special crafted link, and when you click on it, it stays in the render process. But what that means is when you click on that link and it stays in the render process, I can load my page, but I still have access to some of the Electron things that are added to it. And one of the things that's added to that window is the ability to access your camera and microphone. So think about, like, I send you a link, you click on it, it looks like the page broke, you backspace out of the app, but in the background, I still have access to your camera and microphone. And so I could set up a page that would just watch and listen to your computer whenever I wanted until you completely closed out of the Zulip app. So that was kind of an interesting vulnerability that fell outside of the remote code execution. The rest of them were just a couple of different ways to force remote code execution, how they handled default, like open links when you click on them, open it in your default browser. If you give it a full file path with a file colon URL on most systems, if you click on that link, it'll try to open it in the default browser, but the default browser for a file is to just open it. And so you can give it a full path to a file, but that file doesn't have to be on disk. It can be a file path to an NFS share. And specifically on a Mac, that bypasses Gatekeeper and a few other things, because it presumes it's a local path because it's a local mounted drive, but it's really a remote NFS share. It wasn't downloaded from the web, so it doesn't have that Gatekeeper mark. So there was that one. And then there's a specific feature inside of Electron that you want to enable that prevents your web view from sharing a node context with from sharing a JavaScript context with the node environment. And if you're able to get access to the JavaScript environment, the V8 environment from your render view, you can change what node does while it executes. And you can manipulate some of the objects and prototype variables inside of node to force it to leak some of the node APIs into the render view. And once you have access to some of those node APIs, you can do anything, like you can spawn a subprocess and you can read and write files and anything else. So there were some really interesting vulnerabilities. So there was the first one with context isolation went out as a CVE in version 4. Whatever the last 4 version was. And then there were the 2 other remote code execution and the webcam fix went out as 3 new CVEs in the Zulip 5 security release for the desktop. And then there were 2 XSS and a couple other issues that went out in the server version that just went out. There's a couple more issues around the way they handle file uploads and a couple other links that they're still going to push out in another version. So in another version of the server that's taken a little bit longer to fix. So at the end of the day, I suppose they're not paying out for hundreds of bounties, but I also didn't particularly find this application as following best practices or a big, tight, secure app that has a lot of room to start ripping into mature security programs like Slack.
Yeah, I thought their I thought their response was okay. After the fact, I think they gave you credit. They kind of apologized, for that, but
I will say, to their credit, every vulnerability that's reported to them. So I've reported a couple of issues to Slack as well, remote code execution, a couple other issues to Slack. It's not perfect, but they use HackerOne, and you have to proposition them to enable, to allow them to share. It's not automatically shared, and there's not a CVE automatically because they're running and managing their own bounty program. On the other hand, Zulip, it seems like to their credit, it looks like every security issue that they receive, they themselves request a CVE, they publish a write-up, and to be honest, it's pretty easy when you do an update to say fix security issues and brush under what really happened. They enumerated pretty well the security issues and did give credit, and they on their own went and requested CVEs for the individual issues instead of fixed a bunch of security issues, CVE 2020, whatever.
It makes you wonder. Die in a private points only bounty program, because it seems like some companies, bug bounty programs is been a great invention for silencing vulnerability reports and interesting research. And this is definitely interesting research and stuff. Right?
In most bug bounty programs, you can't talk about it, and it's 100% up to, you can't talk about the vulnerability, and it's 100% up to the site that you're reporting it to, whether you can talk about it. And in this site, I didn't end up submitting directly to their HackerOne profile because it's fake internet points. But without asking, either they did a good write-up, put them all out. They weren't hiding. They definitely, I was afraid that they might be, but they definitely weren't hiding behind to their credit, they weren't hiding behind their bug bounty program. They weren't really running it either, but they're definitely not hiding behind it. And all of these are public. And when I look back at the, other blog entries, they do, this isn't the first time they've done that. They've been pretty open about the security issues that they've had and do go above and beyond, to be honest. So many companies have issues and fix them, and that's great. And that's the real goal here. But they definitely go above and beyond at explaining the issues and making them public, which I do give them credit for. And in the source, you can go through and look at the comments, and a lot of the comments for the commits and even comments in the code describe the CVE and things like that. They're really not trying to hide it in or make it look like it never happened or anything. So that was definitely to their credit.
That makes me wonder, where that statement came from, where they were marketing themselves as better because they didn't have the hundreds of bug bounties, if that's a marketing strategy or what.
Oh, it's still there, Adam. It's still.
I know, but their security team has seemed to be, pretty responsive and transparent, like Matt detailed, and makes you wonder, if they had any control over that statement, because
the guy that runs it, I believe I know that there's the main maintainer guy, and I'm 99.9% sure that he's also the person that runs the Twitter account, was the original maintainer of it all. And the defensiveness in the Twitter account, it definitely seems like the same guy that I've worked with and talked to, on getting the vulnerabilities fixed. And he's definitely backed up the state, it was almost defensive of the statement or doubled down on the statement that they made on the website through their Twitter account and things like that. It doesn't seem like a separate team to me.
Okay. Well, I think that if I was managing a bug bounty program, which, I have experience with, I would of course not want something like that posted on our website because, just the difference, and having to be so responsive to your own bug bounty program, but then blame others for having a bug bounty program seems crazy to me.
It's the old adage of it definitely is a target, right? It's like Matt said, oh, we can't be hacked. Well, let's Let's saddle up,
Yeah.
ride into war. You know,
Yeah,
more,
I mean,
something like, you know, the more secure you say your software is, the more likely it is to have vulnerabilities, right? Like
hacker proof. But if they had a paying program, then I would be like, all right, now let's play apples to apples. Like if you're paying out the bounties, I made 100% more on every Slack vulnerability than I did with them. So obviously my focus, you know, will be on spending time with Slack. I spent time on this out of like spite, and I suppose so they still win, I guess. But at the end of the day, like you're definitely not comparing apples to apples when you have a private non-paying bounty program to comparing it to a public paying bounty program. Like sure, like Facebook and Slack can have a pissing match all they want because they both have super active, high paying bounty programs. And then like you can compare if that's what you want to do. I still don't think comparing is healthy, but like at least compare apples to apples. And you know, this was a swipe in a couple of nights, like a couple of evenings, maybe 4 hours of work looking at this app.
Yeah, it was definitely funny, Matt, because you know, we were talking about it, and I swear it was like 2 days later. You're like, oh, I have these 10 things. Like, oh, good. So it's interesting, you know, with your experience in, you know, the bug bounty programs. You know, I've got a little too, but I would think that for the most part, the points only ones don't get as many eyes, nearly as many eyes as the ones that pay. But maybe.
I mean, I think so as well. I mean, a lot of times I think that like we were talking about earlier, I think the points only ones are set up to, you know, facilitate communication in without having to set up a security ad email address and handle that way. You're giving the person that submits stuff to you something, a couple points, whatever. That, but really the points help them get invited to other programs. I'm really not a fan of points only programs. And the only reason I would recommend somebody spend any effort on them is because it'll get you invites to paying programs. But to me, a points only program, I guess it's a way just to facilitate when you don't really want to pay for vulnerabilities, a communication channel that's easy to find, I suppose. But you know, setting it up and having a bounty program in a way says that you expect people to look at it. And if you ever refer to your bug bounty program, like we have an active bug bounty program, but you're not paying for it, in a way you're just saying like, hey, we offered up free work that no one bid on, and therefore we must be secure. Like, you know, your ability to wrangle in free security audits isn't a sign of how secure your app is. And that's effectively what you're saying with a private or with a points only program and trying to actually get security value out of it.
Yeah. I mean, so, you know, outside of the Zulip side, so I came across an interesting one too, and I guess we can kind of segue into that. I was doing work on a bug bounty program, a very private one, and it's one where they even give like an uber secret private invite to their top 5 researchers, which I had just hit because I had turned in a bunch of bugs to them. And so I got an invite, and it turned out that it was actually, they run the Sonotype Nexus OSS product for one of their repository distribution mechanisms for one of their apps. And so I was looking around and poking around, and you know, one of the issues that I really like to look for in applications is usually with regard to access control. So a lot of times I'll try to find a mechanism to change the password of another user. You know, it could be through forgot password functionality, change password functionality, some other weird mechanism. And the great thing is the way they had it set up is I was an admin. I had my own instance, and you know, I could do with it what I wanted. So I created a very basic read-only user and logged in, and that user had no permission to really do anything. I went into my user account, which is about the only thing I could do, and saw that the change password functionality was grayed out. Couldn't enable it, didn't work. So they have a very structured and very granular approach to the way they do their permissions model, and they have all these default privileges built in and baked into the system. So I had to go in and I had to create a role, and there was a privilege in there I can't remember the name of what it was, but all it did was give you the ability to change your password. It was like change user's password or something like that. It was just a privilege. So I added that, created a role, added that to my user, logged back in, and I was just looking at the traffic, and it was an interesting events. So you'd click like the change password, you'd enter your new passwords, and then it would require you to type in your current password, like, you know, any good password change system would do. And the first request that was sent was that authentication request. So you send your current username, your current password, and it responds with some, you know, seemingly unique authentication token. And then it makes another request after that. And in that request, it passes the authentication token, a username, and a password. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. So I looked at that. I was like, hey, what if I change that username to some other username? And sure enough, I just changed it to an admin's username, and it changed that admin's password. And so now I could now log in as an admin because I could change their password. So I found that, and, you know, talking about, you know, companies and doing the right thing and whatever else, I found this in a third-party product for the bug bounty I was working on, and they still paid me for it, even though it's not something they could fix. They couldn't do anything about it. And they're like, hey, could you submit this to Sonotype? And I'm like, okay, cool. I'll see if they've got a bug bounty program. And they don't, you know, which is fine. Not everyone does. But they had something on their site. I think, Matt, you even pointed it out to me, like, hey, if you have security issues, send an email to our security ad account. So I sent it to them, you know, hey, do you guys have bug bounty? If not, you know, whatever, I've got some issues that I'd like to disclose. I sent them on like March 15th. No, actually on March 20th, sorry. So I sent them to Sonotype on March 20th. They responded pretty quickly. I didn't hear anything from them for about a week and a half, and messaged them back on the March 31st. And they said, oh, well, we fixed it. We just released this new version, and we've generated a CVE, and here's a security advisor. So that was all completely done within like a week and a half. So the response was great from Sonotype. It was definitely, you know, I don't expect to find those things. A lot of times they're weird, like some sort of mass assignment issue or whatever else. But that one just kind of jumped out at me. I was like, oh, wow, we're still doing that in, you know, modern applications. But, you know, kudos to them for the quick response, because, you know, basically their access control model is broken. Non-repudiation's gone for something like that. You know, it would have been nice to get a sticker or something. You know, no stickers either. But, you know, response is good though, you know, quick response. You know, they obviously saw that or felt that it was a pretty egregious thing since they jumped on it pretty quickly. So.
All I got was a lousy t-shirt. Not
yeah, I didn't get a lousy t-shirt, right? So it was, it's fun. I mean, with these weird times, I've found myself spending a little more time, like on the weekends, doing some bug hunting here and there, and you know, it'll probably continue. You know, there's a lot of that going on. I think, you know, we talked last time about Zoom and all the stuff that's coming down on them. I think a lot of it is people just have more time to spend doing those things because they're not out doing other stuff, right?
If DEF CON or in Black Hat are still on this year, I want to print out a bunch of t-shirts to say, like, I did bug bounty for blank and didn't even get a t-shirt. And you just like fill it in with a permanent marker.
Yeah.
And we'll dry erase.
The dry erase screen.
Yeah.
Write whatever you want there.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, unless anyone else has any closing thoughts, I had fun today, and we'll probably see everyone next week.
The 0 day heap will spray, clear the way if the log file touch, get your hard line cut. Number 2, never let them know your next move. Don't you know bad boys moving silence and pirate taken from your wireless? I done flashed mad chips with these hacks just to patch these bits. Number 3, never trust nobody. IRC is bad.